really important that we actually separate the advertising of self-care and what actually is self-care. So I want to bring self-care back to you have everything you need to care for yourself.
Welcome to the Happiness and Progress podcast. I'm your host, Danielle Craig. I'm an Emmy award-winning journalist, an international speaker, a mom, wife, and you know what I like to say, just a person looking for more joy in the everyday. This is a space where you belong, not because you earned it, not because of your title, your paycheck, or number of kids you have, but just because you are human and you are good. Here we explore progress over perfection, emotional and spiritual wellness, and how to relish the good parts of life that coexist with the not so good parts. This is Happiness in Progress.
I am so glad you're here for this month's theme of self-care. This month, I really wanted to focus on self-care because in June, all of our priorities seem to tend to little tiny children running around who are our tiny bosses. Just kidding. But for many of us, we are doing a lot in the month of June. And for that reason, I really wanted to make sure that we had something steady going on with our self-care. Especially we can set it up for June and then we can come back to it in July and August. And then throughout the rest of the year, there really isn't a time in the year that we don't need self-care. To start off this series, I wanted to talk about the myth of self-care because it's really been apparent to me that we are learning self-care costs a whole bunch of money. Have you learned that? Self-care is a trip with your girlfriends to the other side of the world. Self-care is going to some exotic place. It is getting facials and getting your hair done and, Botox, your nails done, whatever it is, a massage. All of those things are great and all of those things are fun, but I think it's really important that we actually separate the advertising of self-care and what actually is self-care, right? So I want to bring self-care back to you have everything you need to care for yourself, okay? Self-care does not have to be all of those things that cost a whole bunch of money and that are out of reach for a lot of us, right? So I want to break it down into three things: our thoughts, movement, and showing up for ourselves. So I think our thoughts are really the most powerful form of self-care because our thoughts, so many of us have these negative stories that run in our minds. And, really, I always like to say this is a programming error and it's not our error. It's just the way that our brains work. Our brains are looking for the negativity. Our brains find the negativity. They latch onto it. And then they create this neural pathway that we follow over and over and over and over again. And it's very easy for us to get trapped into these thought cycles that just make us feel not great. So I think the most powerful place for self-care starts in the brain. Okay. So I'm going to talk a little bit about this in the HIP habit for next week. But the first thing is to be aware of those negative thoughts. Okay. So if you're having just tons of negative thoughts, the very first thing I want you to recognize is that it's a negative thought. Wow, I am really being down on myself today. I am beating myself up. I'm not giving myself a win today. Be aware that you're not doing those things because I think first awareness is the first step to making any kind of change, right? Once we're aware of how mean we're talking to ourselves, then we can start to disrupt it. Okay. So if you feel like a failure, you might be like, you make a mistake one of the days and you're gonna be like, wow, I made a mistake. Man, I'm just such an idiot. I never get it right. Like, what's the point of me? I can't figure this out. Okay, that's fine. Negative thoughts, it's okay. They come in. These neural pathways are just so incredible because it's like, I always like to think about it as driving to the place that you didn't mean to go. I just did this yesterday. Actually, I was trying to go to a park and instead I went to my son's school. And it's kind of like that. It's that we have carved out a pathway in our brain So my brain knows I go to the school every day. And so when it's a change in the summer schedule and I'm going to the park, my brain's like, no, you're going to the school, remember? You go to the school right now. I'm not going to beat myself up for the fact that I've got that same, pathway of a negative thought that gets me from getting in my car to my little negative thought space when really I meant to go to the park and really I meant to feel better or have a better way of talking to myself. So all you're going to do is say, well, just like I did when I went to the school, I did a U-turn and I went back to the park. Just going to do some U-turns on your thoughts. So you're going to be driving your normal day and then you get a negative thought. Wow, I'm such a loser. I never get this right. Oh, wait, I'm going to disrupt this because I'm working on my thoughts. I'm working on my self-care, how I talk to myself. So I'm just going to do a little U-turn on that thought. That's fine. No one's mad at you, right? Like we don't need to shame ourselves further. And so you're going to come back on that U-turn and you're going to say, I'm not a failure. I wish I would have done that better, but I'm going to try again. Right? Like that's just the beginning of it. And I think as we get really good at disrupting those thoughts have less power. They come around less often. And, I don't know if there's going to be a time where we always think positively about ourselves, but I do know that there is you feel a lot different when you are actively challenging those thoughts and you don't let yourself go down that dark cycle, that dark hole of despair that you really get when you just beat yourself up. So I think number one, self-care is your thoughts, taking care of your thoughts. And to me, that really is 1, awareness, 2, disruption. And then you could even add 3 as an affirmation of what you want to think on the opposite side of all of these thoughts. In the next week's Hip Habit, I'll talk a little bit about how I get from point A to point B on those affirmations, but it is a slow process and that is okay. But just know that first negative thought, that negative thought is not true. And you're going to take care of yourself and your brain and the way that you feel and the way that you show up by first nurturing yourself with positivity, with positive thoughts. Okay. Number 2, self-care is movement. There are a bazillion studies. That's the technical number. That is the true number. No, truly, there are so many studies that show movement impacts the way that we feel. And so to me, self-care is moving your body. Research I shared not too long ago showed it didn't have to be that much time. It just had to be some kind of effort where you're getting that blood pumping and things are happening in the brain that are really impacting how you feel. We talk about that feel-good hormone that's produced, and all it takes is some kind of movement. And I know everyone has their own favorite kind of movement. Some people like to dance. Some people hate to dance and they would rather be jumping on boxes with CrossFit. Some people like long distance running. Some people like push-ups. It doesn't matter what you're doing. All that really matters is that you are moving your body. I always try to say, start with 20 minutes. If 20 minutes sounds stressful, take a 10-minute walk on a break at work. When your kids are playing on the playground, take a 10-minute walk around the playground. Just take a moment to move your body. That has been one of the single best ways for me to get out of my head, especially during the pandemic. When things were feeling rough and I'm all alone and I'm just, drowning in all of it. There was just so much going on. I would leave my house. When my husband got home, I would take a walk around the neighborhood. When I got back, I was just in such a better and clearer headspace. So number 2 is movement. Try to go for that 20 minutes. If you can't get at least 20 minutes, try to go for 10 minutes a day. But honestly, like I said in a couple of Hip Habits ago, if it's literally, 3 minutes of burpees, that's going to be okay. Find something for you. Finally, the last tip of practicing self-care for me is showing up for yourself. I think it's really important, just like we talk about, there's so many analogies that we talk about, but one of them is putting that oxygen mask on yourself first. The other one is not being able to pour from an empty cup. You need to make sure that you have water in your cup first, or you literally cannot pour anything from that. So how do you show up for yourselves? I think it's really important to maybe think about how we show up for our kids all the time, or our best friend, or our partner, whoever it is. how is it important to us to show up for them? And that's how you find your love language. And that's how you know how to show up for yourself. I was actually talking to one of my kids about this. This particular kid can be a little self-deprecating and feels like it's not a good thing when he shows any kind of pride or, is excited to be successful, because he feels like it makes everyone else feel bad. And it's like not fair to everyone else when he's feeling really good about himself. And so we talked about putting that oxygen mask on. Why does it matter that you excel at something? Or why does it matter that you're doing a good job at something? And that's because it lifts the people up around you. So I would challenge you to think about what it looks like if you put the oxygen mask on yourself first. I'm going to bet it doesn't look like you not eating all day until after lunch and you're like, oh my goodness, I fed everybody, but I forgot to eat anything. Let me grab a leftover chicken nugget, right? It probably doesn't look like waiting 3 days to take a shower. These are personal examples. But I think what it means is carving out a little bit of time in your day where you show up for yourself. What is a way that you take care of your mind? What is a way that you take care of your body? What is a way that you take care of the way that you feel? That's how you show up for yourself. How you show up for yourself is going to be different depending on who you are and what stage of life you are in. But I think it's important just to brainstorm some thoughts. What could I do in this chaotic part of my life to show up for myself? How can I, dig out some quiet for myself? How can I make sure that I'm eating all 3 meals? How can I make sure that while I'm trying to meet the needs of my children or my partner or my friend or my boss, that I'm also meeting the needs of myself? I think that just starts with the brainstorm. And with that, I want to thank you for being here on Happiness and Progress. I'm really excited for our next episode because we're going to be talking about how self-care is actually self-love and how we can build that foundation of self-love. And don't forget, if you like listening to this podcast, go ahead and subscribe, give it a rating. It really helps me to continue doing this work. Plus, if you want a workbook to go along with these episodes, you can find it by subscribing on Patreon. Thanks for being here on Happiness and Progress.